When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, 7:13 a.m. User, 3alcam. Posted, February 17th, 1998.
Last December was my first hunting season alone, and if it wasn't hard enough getting my ass in gear, when I did, I was not ready for what was about to happen. My brother had always been the better shot, more patient. I'd fidget in the stand, waiting for something to move, while he could sit there all day without once shifting his weight. Never sneezed, coughed, or nothing. I swear he could have breathed in sync with the trees. But now, it was just me. Or at least me and this toxic shame that I carried on my back like a backpack full of stones. You see, last year, my brother died overdosing on the pills that I gave him, and look, I don't even know how to say anything else about that. Obviously, it wasn't on purpose. I didn't even know he was using like that. He just asked if I had anything for his back, and I did. Some painkillers left over from when I wrecked my knee doing drywall last spring. So I just handed them over without thinking. 2 days later, he was gone. And now I was walking into the woods alone. It was supposed to be an overnight trip. My stand was about a mile in, tucked near the ridge where the deer moved at dusk. I parked my truck off the logging road, hiked in, and settled myself before the sun dipped. The air was cold. The woods were quiet. Too quiet. It felt wrong. And not just because I was alone and grieving. I mean, I was alone and I was carrying guilt, but this was more physical, like someone was right there, just out of sight. It was that prick at the back of your neck when you walk past a dark room. I tried to shake it. Hadn't even chambered around yet, no sense in spooking myself before I even started hunting, but then I heard a voice float through the air around me. You gonna do it again? I damn near fell out of the stand. My breath hitched, my fingers clenched tight around my rifle. I snapped my head to the side, but there was nothing there. What happens next time? It whispered in a way that was so close yet so far. I twisted so fast the stand creaked under me as I tried to see if it was behind me, but again, nothing. Just trees, cold air, and the sound of my own breathing. I sat there for a long time, pulse hammering, teeth clenched so tight my jaw ached. This was my imagination, right? My guilt fucking with me. Hell, maybe I dozed off for a second, dreamt it. That had to be it. I don't remember climbing down, but I must have, because when I came to, I was on the ground, the air colder than before. My stand was gone. The trees around me weren't the ones I had hiked past earlier. They were thicker, gnarled like old hands twisting toward the sky. I checked my watch, 3:12 a.m. My rifle was slung over my shoulder, my pack still with me. But the woods did not look the same. The ridge should have been visible in the moonlight, but it wasn't. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on, and the second the beam cut through the dark, a whisper came again. This time, right behind my ear. Put it out. I froze. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The whisper was close, too close. I turned the light toward the sound, sweeping it over the trees, but nothing. You're gonna kill someone else. I spun in circles, flashlight shaking in my hand. The voice wasn't coming from one place. It was moving, circling me. I could feel something watching just outside the beam's reach, teasing me with its voice. Reluctantly, I turned off the flashlight and started aimlessly meandering forward by the light of the moon. I walked for what felt like days. I'm not kidding, and I know that doesn't make sense, but I mean it. Days. My legs burned, my lips cracked, my hands shook. The hunger that grew in my stomach became almost unbearable, and with every step, I felt heavier, like the forest itself was pulling me down. But the worst part of it all was that I could hear them moving in the trees, whoever they were. I could deal with the hunger, with the burning muscles and discomfort, but the voices were pure torture. Sometimes they whispered, sometimes they laughed. I barely slept, and when I did, I woke up somewhere different. The ground colder, the air thicker. I'd blink and the trees would shift, but the sky never changed. It was always locked in that deep, empty black that comes right before dawn. As hopelessness set in, I started to feel like there wasn't even a dawn anymore. As I walked, I thought about my brother. It was the only thing that kept me comfort. It wasn't the last time I saw him, slumped over and gone. It was us as kids, running barefoot through the grass. The way he'd always turn back to make sure I was keeping up. As comforting as those memories were, though, they always ended with the shame-filled realization that I hadn't done the same for him. Meanwhile, the voices in the woods continued on. They called my name. They mocked me, told me I didn't deserve to leave, said if I did, I'd just bring death back with me. That I'd never been good enough to save anyone, least of all my own blood. I started to believe them. How could I not? But then one morning, I woke, curled up at the base of a tree, and realized the sky was different. My head was heavy, my mouth dry, my body ached like I'd been fighting something all night. And that's when I saw my truck. It was maybe 100 yards away, parked exactly where I'd left it. I stared at it for a long time, my brain refusing to make sense of it. I had been walking for days. I'd gotten lost somewhere deep, hadn't I? Yet here I was. I still do not know what happened, but When I climbed into the truck and cranked the ignition, the clock on the dash read 7:13.
Subject, the ledger. User, Datanon. Posted April 2nd, 1999.
I have built my entire life around control. It is the reason I have what I have and am what I am. It's how I've been able to climb the cutthroat corporate ladder with such effortlessness, and the means by which I've survived in a world where survival is hardly a given. Control is how, just over a decade ago, I became the youngest CFO this Fortune 500 company has ever seen, and I did it all without a sweat, really. You see, my job is to ensure that nothing, absolutely nothing happens without my knowledge. The numbers never lie. They are the only truth I've ever trusted. Yet here I am today, after all of this success, that my beliefs are being challenged. Something is happening, something even I can't quantify, something I can't control. It started 3 weeks ago at the company's annual gala. The event was everything you'd expect: caviar, champagne, people in tuxedos pretending to give a shit about each other. I was halfway through a conversation with one of our board members when I noticed him, a man who definitely did not belong. He was older, frail-looking, with a worn-out suit that might have been nice 50 years ago. As far as I could tell, he didn't speak to anyone else, just stood there near the edge of the room, watching me with eyes far too sharp for someone so tired. It was unnerving, but I had business to attend to, so I carried on, keeping an eye on him throughout the night. Eventually, though, as I peeled away from some idiot hedge fund type and headed to the bar, the stranger walked straight up to me. No hesitation. "Mr. Kendall," he said, his voice calm and deliberate, "I need a moment of your time." I should have brushed him off. I've dealt with plenty of lunatics who think they're owed something, but there was something in the way he looked at me, something that made my skin crawl, and the tone of his voice had a certain air about it that felt like he wasn't going to take no for an answer. "Your company owes me a debt," he said, "one that's long overdue." "What?" I snorted, caught off guard. That was the kind of line you'd expect from a bad mob movie. Was this dude drunk? I thought, as the expression on my face clearly betrayed my inner monologue's ability to hide behind pleasantries. "The debt must be paid," he said, leaning in closer, his breath cold and smelling faintly of ash. One way or another. A chill ran up my spine, and that amusement I had quickly evolved into something more serious. I turned to call security, but when I looked back, he was gone. Just gone. The next day, I told myself none of that mattered. Crazy people show up at events like that all the time, and I had certainly had my share of cocktails, so maybe I'm just imagining the stranger parts of it all. But then, the emails started. They came from an internal account, one I had never seen before. At first, they were just fragments, a single word or two. Balance due, payment required. I assumed it was a prank, like one of those chain letters, but then I noticed the dates. The emails said they were from the 1920s. Now, look, that was just absurd, so I called IT and had them come look into it. They found nothing. No record of the account ever existing. No signs of a hack. Just empty logs and blank stares. The next day, the ledger arrived. It was on my desk when I walked in that morning and came in a plain brown envelope with no return address. Inside was an old, leather-bound ledger, the kind they used before computers. The entries were handwritten, neat and precise, detailing transactions from nearly a century ago. But when I flipped to the last few pages, my heart stopped. The names were familiar, too familiar. Executives, board members, all people I knew, people who had passed over the years. Accidents, heart attacks, and in one case, suicide. Well, each name was followed by a date and a single phrase: debt paid in full. This had to be a joke, right? Someone was fucking with me. I slammed my hand onto the intercom button and called my secretary and demanding she explain where the book came from, and she insisted up and down that she had no idea. She had never seen it before that moment, didn't even know how it got onto my desk. I apologized for my temper and told her I was just stressed, but I needed her to do me a favor and head down to the personnel office and get me several files. The men whose names were listed in that book. When she returned, it was clear. The dates in the ledger aligned with the dates of their death. I could not believe it, especially because the very last entry was a name I knew all too well. Robert Kendall. It was me. I closed the ledger and locked it in my desk, telling myself I was losing my mind. Stress, sleep deprivation, hell, maybe even a lingering hangover. There had to be a logical explanation. But that night, that man appeared in my office. I was going over quarterly reports when I felt it. Presence, like someone standing just behind me. I turned and there he was, but he was older than before. His skin seemed paler and stretched too thin across his face. "I told you," he said. "The debt must be paid." I tried to yell for security, but my voice caught my throat. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't move. The old man then leaned in, his lips barely an inch from my ear. "You can't run from what's owed," he whispered. Then he was gone. This morning, I tried to convince myself it was a nightmare, but the ledger is still there, waiting for me in that drawer. I flipped through it again and again, slower every time. The dates matched everything, every scandal, every corporate shakeup, every mysterious death in the company's history. And every 5 years, there's a new name. Always a high-ranking executive, always someone important. I did the math. I know numbers, and there is no doubt the last debt was paid 5 years ago, tomorrow. All these years, all this time, I have truly believed that I was in control, that I brought the success to this company. But it turns out, it just might be the man with the ledger who really is. I guess tomorrow we'll know for sure.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.